Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 20. In this lesson, we are going to look at how to use events to create the drag and drop for HTML elements. Now in HTML, we cannot place an element on another element, but in HTML5, we have several events that can allow us to drag an element from a container or from a part of a page and drop it on another part of a page. First of all, we are going to create these containers on the page, and then we're going to use JavaScript to write functions that will allow us to drag and to drop. So I have two files here, the drag.html and the drag.js file. On this file, we are going to create containers that will hold an object that we want to drag and drop. So we're going to do this in its simplest form, and then we're going to apply this to creating a page that holds, let's say, images, for instance. Let's say we want to create a page for kindergarten students where they can drag an image that stands for something. So let's say we have an image of an apple, a banana, and we want them to drag it into container labeled A, B, C, indicating the start of those letters. So we're going to create something like that. But let's start with creating the containers here. So I want to first of all use the div tag to create. I will start with 3 containers. So I'll create 3 div containers like this. And I'm going to give each of this container an ID to uniquely identify the container. So let me name this container 1, and this will be ID of container 2, and this is going to be ID container 3. So I have these 3 containers. I want the first container to hold an item that I want to drag between the second and third container, and I'll be able to return that item to the first container. So I'm going to put another item here. I'm going to use a div tag, and I'm going to use an ID here, and I'll say this is an ID of, let's say, drag item 1, or let's say we have 2 items that we can drag. So I'll say an ID here is drag item 2. So I've created 3 containers. Let's create styles for these containers so that we can see them on the page. So I want to create a style for container 1, 2, and 3. So let's say container 1, container 2, container 3. I want to float to the left so they can be laid out side by side. So I'll put float left. I also want to set a width for the container. Let's say the container is 150 pixels. I want to set a height for the container. Let's say the height is 100 pixels. We want it to have a margin around it to be, I'll use 20 pixels, and I want it to have a border, and let's say the border is, let's say it's 1 pixel and is solid, and I'll use red. I'll save this, refresh my page. I have the 3 containers here. I want to have the item container to have 2 items. So I'm going to put a style for drag item 1 and drag item 2. So I'll put it like this, drag item 1, drag item 2. And I'm going to make a style to say, I want it to have a background color of blue. Just want a tiny blue box on the page. Let's put a height of 20 pixels so we can have a box, and we have a width of, let's use 20 pixels. Let's use a border. I want the border to be 2 pixels. We want it to be dashed, and we want it to be green. And then let's use a margin of 10 pixels between them, or let's say 5 pixels. And let me save, refresh. We have 2 boxes, and the margin did not apply. And so we have 2 boxes with the margin of 5 pixels between them here. What I want to do is to be able to grab this and drop here. And by default, we can't grab any container in HTML. The first thing you do, for the item you want to be able to drag, you want to set an attribute called draggable like this, and you set the value to true. So we're going to set both as draggable containers, and we'll set them to true. So we have these 2, refresh, and now we can take it and move it. But we have not created anything that allows this to accept the item. So what we want to do as the overall goal is to be able to take this, drop it either here, or take it back here. So we want to be able to create that effect when we can move items around in a page. And when you start creating things like, let's say an education application, you want to create an examination portal where you have drag and drop kind of examination for, let's say if you are creating this for lower grade schools, this will come in handy because you will need to have some drag and drop kind of questions. And so we're going to look at how to do that. So we have successfully made this a draggable item. We want to be able to drop these items when grabbed into the container. And we're going to create that effect in the drag.js file. Now, there are events that are fired when you drag. Like when we grab this item, 3 events happens when we drag this. One of the events is drag start. As I grab this, the drag start event fired. As long as I keep moving, the drag event is fired. And when I stop, the drag end fires. So there are 3 events that fires. When I drag these items, these 3 events happens, and at that point, this item I'm dragging becomes the target item. When I drop, the item that is dropped becomes the target item. If I drop the item, or 4 events happens, we have the drag enter that happens as soon as the drag element is over the drag target. So once this is over this, drag enter starts. Once I continue moving around the boundaries, I will have my drag over firing. And once I leave that boundary, drag leave fires. And when I drop it there, the drop event fires. So there are different events we can use. And we can use the drag enter, drag over, drag leave to create styles, different styles, like we have in the link where you hover around when it's active, those kind of styles. So we can call those events, and on those events happening, we want to change the style, maybe change the border. We want to highlight the container to tell us that we are around the boundaries, things like that. But we're going to focus more on when we start dragging and when we drop. And those are the styles we are going to create. And because when we start dragging, the first thing we want to do is to always allow the elements to be able to accept another element drop on it. And so we're going to create a function first. And that function, we're going to name it allow drop. And we're allowing a drop event to happen here. What we'll do, we want to prevent the default behavior, which is that elements should not allow other elements to be dropped on them. So we're preventing default in the allow drop function. We want to have another function. And this function, we want it to be a function that allows us to drag the element, and when it drags the element, we want it to grab the ID of the element being dragged, and we are going to use, let's say, event dot. There's a property or there's an object called data transfer that has 2 methods, the set data and the get data. Here we are going to set the data by using the data transfer object dot set data, and we are going to provide the format, which is usually text, and either we have a text or plain format, or we have URI list. So you specify text here, and we want to say we are going to be getting the ID. So av.target.id. So this is all we are going to do here. You can add further styles here if you want to do something else when this is dragged. But we want to set this data, and when it is dropped, we want to get it. So let's say drop, and on drop event, we want it to say, so when it is dropped again, the default is to open it as a link, and we want to prevent that default behavior. So we'll say prevent default first, and then we want to create a variable called data. And what we want to do here is to get so say data transfer dot get data. And all we are providing here is just the format, which is text. When we do this, we also want to say, so we want to get that target ID, and we want to append child. And what we are appending is the element with the ID that we have gotten. So we'll say element document dot get element by ID, and we want that to be data. So this is like the standard when you want to drag and drop. This is as easy as you can write your code for JavaScript. You allow it to be able to drop item on themselves. You create a function for dragging, and this function sets the data of the item drag. And for the drop, you want to also get the data for the item that is dropped. And when you get it, you want to add this now, the item that is dropped as a child in the container that it is being dropped in. And so we've written these 3 functions. It's time to apply these functions on our HTML file. Now, for this container, we want the first container to hold the items that are draggable, and we also want it to be able to allow us to return the items back in the event that we change our mind about taking the item out of the container. And what we will do here is to add an attribute called onDrop. So if you want to use it as add event listener, you're going to be using the drop event and call the function. And so we want to say onDrop, and we'll call the function drop like this. We also want to allow when the draggable item comes back here, so we'll say onDragOver. When it comes here, we want it to take the function allow drop. So it should allow it to drop the item here. This onDrop and onDragOver, we're going to add it to all the containers that should allow drop of item in them. Now, for the item that are draggable, we want to add just one function, the drag function. So we say on drag start. So once we start dragging, we want it to call the function drag. In the parentheses, we'll give it the argument event. When I save this and all is well, I should be able to grab this item and drop it in another container, drag this and drop it in another container. We're going to check our code. So we have this has container 2, container 3, item 1, and item 2. So we did not put the on drag start here. So I'll put on drag start, and what we want to do here is to allow it to drag event. Save, refresh. I'll be able to take this here, take this here. I'll be able to return them. And so this is how we can use the drag and drop. So you are going to read more about this, read more about the events that are fired and how to use the events. And I want you to try using things like drag enter to create styles. Like when the drag item is hovering around the boundaries, you want to say, let's say you want to change the color of the border of the drop container to something else so that you know that you are within the boundaries, and when it leaves, it goes back to the original. So you can try your hands around that to see how you can create that. I'm not going to do that for you because I want to encourage you to explore with this. Now, this is the basic way we can do this. So we can add more containers for dropping. For instance, let's say we want to use images instead of these containers like this. So I'm going to remove the div tag and change this to an image. So let's say this is now an image tag. And in my images folder, I have the image of an apple, banana, cherry, dates. I want here to have the image of apple. I want here to have, I'll change this to an image, the image of banana. So let's set this image height and width. Let's say I want this image to have the height of 30, the width of 30. So let me say width is equal to 30 and height is equal to 30. Or I'll make it 20. So let's make it as, let's just leave it as 30. And I'm going to do the same thing, width and height for the banana. And I'm going to copy this. I'm going to create 2 more images. And I want this to be the image of the cherries. The extension is JPG. So don't forget your file extension. And banana.jpg. We are going to use this as date.jpg. So we have the images. We'll change the IDs to draggable item 3, 4. And then we have drop events. Let's say this allows drop of everything labeled A, labeled B. So let's create 2 more containers, container 4 and 5. So let's say this is container 4, container 5. Let's name this C and this D. And so we'll go back to our styles. We want to remove the style for the drag item. We want to add container 4 and container 5 here. Let's save this, refresh our page to see if we have all our images. So I have the 4 images here, and I have made all of these the containers where we want to drag these images, grab it, and drop it anywhere. So what we want to do is, let's assume that this is a question and we want the children to be able to take the picture that starts with an A, put it in the container labeled A. So we put apple here, we put banana there, we put cherries there, and we put dates there. So if we have more images here that are not draggable, you can leave it there, and this would be like answers to questions that they've arranged them in correct order or in their correct container. So these are the kind of applications you can develop using them drag and drop. And so in summary, we can use events to drag and drop items from one location to another, and we can put an element on another element by preventing the default behavior of elements. When we add the attributes on the HTML element, we use the onDrop attributes to be able to apply a function or write a function that will allow us to drop an element on another element, and then we use the onDragOver to allow the drop event on the container that should accept an item be dropped on it. And for the drag item, we specify the draggable attributes and we set it to true. And then we use the onDragStart attributes to specify what happens when we drag the item or when we grab the item to drag. And then for all the elements that should accept, they should always have the onDrop and the onDragOver attributes at the minimum. And then we can apply more things like trying to do drag leave, drag enter. Styles, we can change the styles. We can use CSS to apply when we have onDragOver. What do we do? Maybe if we are dragging over, we want to change the container or the borders to green. We want to do something. So I want you to explore that way and see how you can play around with this to create more styles when you hover around a droppable container or a container that allows drop, when you leave that place after hovering, what happens? So explore that and use that. And this is where we end this lesson. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.